It's time again for the Insiders with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.
Hi, I'm Chuck Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
And I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker.
We're the Insiders. So, Scott, we've got a big Supreme Court race coming up in 2025, but now Ann Walsh Bradley has stepped aside and said she's not going to run for re-election. Do you think that makes a big difference on the race?
Oh, completely. I mean, we've already been talking about this race and her ability as an incumbent to hang on to that seat and help the Democrat or liberal faction of the court, hang on to their majority. It's very hard to beat a Supreme Court incumbent. It's happened like once or twice in the last 40 years, I believe. And so that would have been a really difficult challenge, I think, for the conservative candidate. But now it's an open seat, so that completely transforms it. In an open seat, I think people, there's a lot of issues, of course, that will come up, but I think that experience tends to matter again in something like that. And Brad Schimmel is someone, a longtime prosecutor, was the Attorney General of the state of Wisconsin and has been a judge, has quite a resume and no ideological competition so far on the conservative side. On the Democratic side, it looks like there could be two very liberal Dane County judges considering running. Perhaps there'll be somebody from the Milwaukee area as well. They'll have essentially a primary on the Democratic side. And I think they're likely to end up with a Dane County liberal as their candidate. So I think that is all very different than a race that had a northern Wisconsin longtime Democrat incumbent running for re-election versus an open seat. So I think things have improved dramatically for conservatives, and I'm upbeat about Brad Schimmel's chances of winning that.
I think that what's changed is that we have become so tribal, and we saw this with the Protasewicz race, who won, by the way, with what was it, 10 or 11%? I think it was 11% of the margin. So I think here's the deal. I think that, yes, I think it is a net negative, but I don't think it is as big, for example, as what happens in the presidential race. I think whoever wins the presidential race, Republican or Democrat, that will make it harder in the spring. So even if I win with Joe Biden, that will make it a tougher race in the spring. But here's the thing that I think is really going to determine the factor. It used to be a huge advantage for Republicans, and Scott and I have talked about this before. Scott would say, "Hey, this is where people want law and order. They get the law enforcement vote, and boom, it's all over." What's happened now is that this is a lower turnout race by definition. We both know that, and what it is it's really a turnout issue. And where is the turnout coming from? It is coming from the cities and the suburbs, and those suburbs have really moved more in the direction of Democrats. And so the difficulty that the Republicans have is they basically have to make up that 11% that Janet Protasewicz got in her election. Now, admittedly, she ran a really good campaign. She was a strong candidate. Her opponent wasn't very strong. But even with all of that, I think in a spring election where there's low turnout and the suburbs and the cities are really going to dominate, I really think that the Democrats or the progressives, but we may as well call them partisans, I think that the progressive candidate will have a very significant advantage. I think Republicans are now running in a field where they're running against about uphill against a 5% disadvantage. And I don't think Schimmel will be able to make that up. Oh, and by the way, the other thing I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, is that even more so, reproductive rights is an issue in Wisconsin in judicial races, and that also creates a problem for Republicans.
So the last race, of course, I think was $50 million, the most expensive state Supreme Court race in American history by a factor of 3 or 4. And this one will be more expensive, right? Because essentially now people see what a majority on the Supreme Court can mean. And people on the Democratic side are cheering the Democratic majority they now have on the court and all the benefits it has provided them. And conservatives are walking around going, okay, we get it. We realize how important this is right now. And so that plus they're going to spend more than 50 million. I don't think this is going to be a low turnout race. This is for all the chips, and for both sides. And I think this is going to be an extraordinarily expensive race and a much higher race for turnout than you would expect for a spring Supreme Court race in Wisconsin.
Well, it's going to be an interesting one, and there will be a lot of money and a lot of opportunity for us to talk about it. So we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to The Insiders with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.